Hello and welcome back to XCOM 2. We're looking at some more guides, and today I have a very interesting video for you. 10 minutes, 10 tips how to improve your XCOM gameplay. So we're going fast, one tip per minute, and many of them might sound logical, but really keep in mind that you need to work hard on your XCOM game in order to beat it on the highest difficulty. There's always room for improvement. So without further ado, let's take a look. Tip number one, and that is the most important tip that I can give anyone playing XCOM. Improve your map awareness. You should only pull a single pod at a time if possible. I took two examples of really compelling, typical early game mistakes that you can make. Left side, single pod, one of the officers with two of the troopers. Right hand side, you pull two packs. Immediately you can see that the number of shots that they are going to take, the number of hit points that it will take to get them down, plus their zombies, and their special abilities are superior in the case of pulling multiples. So it goes without saying, but what does map awareness mean? Map awareness means you do assume that there are multiple packs. If you have pulled one, make sure to not go overboard with it. And we will see a lot of it in the later tips. So that is number one, probably the most discriminating factor between a good and a bad XCOM player. Number two, use high ground to your advantage. I have used one of the screenshots that I found on the internet regarding an end game summary of Legendary Iron Man. You can see that the usage of high ground would have probably helped you in a scenario like this immensely. So assuming that over the lifespan of a campaign you used high ground 25% of the time, and assuming that you, similarly to this gentleman, killed 1,150 aliens, and assuming, just from my experience, that the average number of shots, including missed shots, that you need to kill an alien is about, give and take, 2.5 per alien, then you will end up with an overall number of shots fired during a campaign of around 3,000, so 2,865, and a number of failed shots, depending on how well you play, between 30 and 40%. I believe that on the screenshot of this gentleman there, the successful shot percentage is inflated. 85% is pretty high. Probably not 100% legit, but I don't know. Overall number of failed shots, if you look at the percentage rate, therefore would be around 860 to 1,150. Now, if you just are interested of how big of a bonus high ground is, the number of additional hits that you would get over such a long campaign is 20% out of 20% more hit chance, and you use it 25% of all of the shots. So overall 144 shots that wouldn't have been a hit would hit on top of it. That is 2.5 per mission. Just keep it in mind. The sweet 2.5 extra hits that could save your life. Tip number three, do not charge in. Most of the maps in XCOM 2 are very densely populated. It is easy, super easy, to pull a second pod. The risk of pulling an additional pod in most of the cases, 90+% of the time, does not outweigh the single kill that you can get. The tactic that you should maybe, again, 90% of the time follow is the first move that you take is the furthest move that you are going to take into the enemy territory. Every consecutive move afterwards is not moving into any direction which could pull more enemies. If you follow that principle, you might find yourself with a little bit of a firefight, and maybe some of your soldiers will be injured, but quite certainly you're not going to be overrun by the enemy because you pulled 2 or 3 packs. So keep it safe and don't charge in. Number 4, pace yourself correctly. Know exactly how to deal with timers. I mentioned it in some of my videos. The way that XCOM works is it assumes that depending on the distance that you are away from the target, it will give you between 1 and 2 rounds for movement. that might increase if the distance of movement is extremely long. Could be up to 5 rounds of movement for the timer. Then it adds +1 round for every pack that is on the map. It assumes that you single pull them, kill them, then move on. It also adds 1 additional round for the mission objective itself and about 1 to 2 rounds as buffer. So if you see a 7 rounds of estimated remaining time, you could assume probably 3 packs of enemies, a station to hack, that's 4 rounds, 2 rounds of moving there, and 1 round buffer. That's kind of the standard setup how XCOM works. Now, depending on how far you moved and depending on how many enemies you have killed, you can already always see how far ahead or behind the curve you are. I would caution you that it is, again, way easier to pull a single pod and kill that single pod afterwards. Good. Next up, number 5, use your cooldowns correctly. I can't stress that enough. Cooldowns are to be used, but they are to be used in the right circumstance. Before you go to consumables, always use your cooldowns. Those who are free actions like lightning hands or the whip of the skirmisher are to be saved for intense battles. If you're pulling that second pack, you want to spike damage and kill as many enemies as possible in a short amount of time. Secondly, use the correct order of all of these skills. More often than not, I've seen that someone is forgetting to shred or is not using the holo targets first, and so on and so forth. Long story short, you got to be on your toes. And last but not least, remember to maximize your actions. There are a couple of actions that every single soldier can use that are not ending their turn. Reloading as an example, if you're not a sniper. Movement, if you're not a sniper. Aid protocol, if you can shoot on top of it. Quick draw, salvo, fanfire, psy push, etc. You name it. These little things are doing the difference. I've seen dozens of streamers sitting on a rooftop shooting but forgetting to reload, although no one has ever moved. And then 2 or 3 rounds down the road, they find themselves in a situation where they were missing that extra action. Next up, use tip number 6, use consumables after you have used your cooldowns. Keep in mind that you will end up in a 6-man squad with around 6 to 7 consumables. So 3 grenades per grenadier, and then a couple of soldiers will have 1 consumable. On very difficult missions, you are usually counting in between 15 and 30 enemies, which means if you are too frequently using these things, you are simply going to lose on the war of attrition, and the last enemies are going to run you over. Similar to the timer, pace yourself, know how many enemies you have killed, and adjust your consumables correctly. You want to use them when they are necessary and not just because you felt like it. Tip number 7, learn to destroy enemies' cover. I know that many are already doing it, but I've seen so many misconceptions about how to destroy cover in a proper way that I think it is important to remember when is it really necessary to remove cover and what other means exist. So first and foremost, explosives are kind of super straightforward to remove cover, but keep in mind also heavy weapons such as the shredder cannon can be used to remove cover. Several skills can deal with this topic. For instance, the remote start skill, Psy Push can push the enemy out of cover. A grappling hook likewise can do the same. Destruction from the grenadier can do the same. And you can also quote-unquote negate cover by using high ground or flanking effectively. So keep in mind that positioning can help there as well. Tip number 8, learn how to use cover yourself. There is nothing worse than being overrun by enemies. Or being overrun by enemies and standing in the open eating the crits that the aliens are dealing. The big problem is aliens will always prioritize enemies that are standing in the open. You're more likely to be hit, and the enemies will tend to do focus fire. If you play your cards right, and if you have the right setup, for instance, a Templar with parry or an assault with untouchable, you can use it to your advantage. If there's only one alien, just by all means stand in the open so he can shoot the guy who's anyways indestructible, right? But don't do it on a regular, and make sure that cover always has priority. If you watch my stream, you will see I'm going for cover almost always. Running out of time, the last two tips real quick: focus fire and eliminate targets in order. I maybe will do a complete separate video around this, and where I talk about the highest priority targets. In a nutshell, the tip means you need to understand which enemy is supposed to die first and why you are doing this. Also, track down the cooldowns on your enemies. Some of the enemies have just used their most dangerous ability and therefore are less dangerous. Sectoids come to mind. And last but not least, have a effing plan B, which means if things go sour, make sure that you do have an out. An out could be a flashbang, an out could be a mimic beacon, a smoke grenade, you name it. There are many outs. But make sure that you create these outs. I've seen many players moving their only character with a mimic beacon first, and then wondering at the end of the turn, when things are not going their way, why there is no one that could help them. Don't be that guy. Think about it up front and make sure that you have always one unit that could execute a plan B. That's it. This is how you improve your XCOM 2 gameplay. 10 tips in a little bit more than 10 minutes. Keep it real, guys. And if you liked the video and if you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to comment down below.